advertise for critics in the newspaper, at least not for the last decade or so. It's actually kind of a huge problem in the industry, leaving many precariously balanced with little to no sense of existential security as more and more outlets pivot to video. That was my profession. Ex-student, ex-clerk, ex-reviewer. The director's name was Denny. I liked that one movie with the spiders. Studios must have upped him to the blockbuster unit. That gibberish he inspired was critic talk, a mishmash of pretense, high art reference, deliberately mannered pacing, and a vain hope that yet another sequel to a great film that absolutely did not need one might be at least decent. I didn't need a translator. I knew the lingo. Every film school brat did. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. This is a reference to the original movie. It's supposed to be funny. Ha. Ha ha. Ha.
Blade Runner did not need a sequel. That in and of itself isn't necessarily reason not to make a sequel. Rocky didn't need a sequel and they made 6, and really only the 5th one is bad. That's a really strong brand. But in any case, Blade Runner definitely did not need a sequel. Not just because it has at least 3 different endings, none of which demanded any follow-up despite coming in both ambiguous and definitive flavors, though that certainly doesn't help. But the fact is, Blade Runner is one of those miracle movies where the end result is an amazing, inspiring, brilliant, thought-provoking, genre-redefining all-time classic that also seems to have happened somewhat by accident, what with the script constantly being changed, multiple competing edits, probably the most memorable dialogue being improv'd on set by Rutger Hauer, and the big central ambiguous mystery that fans have been obsessed over for decades maybe being similarly thought up on the fly by Scott mid-filming, and yeah, all that. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Blade Runner. I just get the sense it's maybe a pretty good movie that turned out transcendent on a narrative level by a confluence of unplanned factors that may not have been noticed had an entire generation not become obsessed with its design scheme, completely revolutionizing our concept of imagining the near future. So, how does any film expect to make that kind of lightning strike twice, let alone bottle it for a sequel? As it turns out, better than you'd expect. Okay, so if you've never seen Blade Runner, well, see Blade Runner, but for formality's sake, the premise here is it's the near future and all the grunt work is done by super strong, short-lived, manufactured artificial human beings called replicants. They're only supposed to be used on space colonies because sometimes the ones who don't know they're not real because they have implanted fake memories find out the truth and go all murdery, so there's these special cops called Blade Runners whose job is to track down and terminate them. We still don't know exactly why they're called Blade Runners. The first one was mainly about Harrison Ford as a Blade Runner named Deckard who starts to question the philosophical morality of his job when he falls in love with a replicant woman while also trying to stop a squad of renegades from killing their creator, and featured a lot of subtle background innuendo insinuating that Deckard might actually be a replicant himself. And that's kind of the problem with making a sequel to this. The parts of Blade Runner that aren't just a killer robot movie, only gooier and with great set design, are all about ambiguity, unanswered questions, and open-ended philosophical conundrums, which a sequel is almost invariably going to try and give us answers to, and that's not always a great idea. In any case, our premise is that it's now 2049, replicants are back in fashion because a wealthy, obnoxious, off-putting weirdo played by Jared Leto, but I repeat myself, made some new, supposedly more obedient ones, but some of the dangerous ones are still skulking around, so there's still Blade Runners out to bust them. Specifically, Ryan Gosling as a Blade Runner, who this time we're told right up front is a replicant designed to hunt his own kind, but this time has also stumbled onto a mystery involving evidence that a replicant may have done something that their species is not supposed to be able to do and needs to be covered up with extreme prejudice. And don't be shocked, but it seems to be connected to whichever actors from the first movie were down with a guest appearance. What's interesting, though, is that while everyone expected director Denis Villeneuve to faithfully recreate and even expand the now famous techno-dystopian atmosphere of the original, I was surprised to realize that the film itself is also trying to mimic the text versus subtext structure of the first film as well. Once again, we've got a fairly standard sci-fi detective story that proceeds largely on reliable, even predictable beats that mostly adds up to a skeleton connecting the visually imaginative set pieces and largely self-contained narrative vignettes where characters explore the nature of their existence. What's different this time around is that instead of hovering in the background to be noticed and parsed out later, these meditative moments tend to plant their feet at center stage and essentially announce, "Attention! The plot will now pause for an abbreviated episode of Black Mirror." The best of which is a series of captivatingly off sequences involving Gosling's romance with an artificially intelligent personal assistant hologram played by Ana de Armas in what might be a career-making turn that plays out a lot like somebody watched Her, remember that one, and said, hey, this could be a lot more uncomfortable. And all of that business basically works. I mean, if you're going to do a movie mainly to string together a series of nominally connected mood pieces, you might as well make them all about compelling characters using science fiction tropes to dig into the nature of their own existence. Good stuff. What's less successful is the actual more basic story stuff that's supposed to provide a semblance of momentum. See, it's not that it's a bad story or that it's not well told or boring. I mean, it feels long, but it certainly doesn't feel like over 2.5 hours long. It's just, well, whereas in the original, the deliberately simple find and stop the bad guy story played out in an appropriately simple, straightforward way, 2049 wants to have the actual twists and big meaningful reveals while still being familiar and basic within the genre. In other words, if you've seen one dystopian sci-fi movie at some point in the 3 decades between Blade Runner and today, you're probably going to work out the hook, the theme, the callback to the original, the red herring, and the actual reveal, and may, like me, end up feeling like the payoff didn't really justify the build-up. However, getting there is a pretty damn fulfilling experience. It is a gorgeous looking film, the score is very good, the acting is solid across the board, with Ana de Armas and Sylvia Hoek as essentially Rachel from the first one, but also a Terminator, as the standouts, and Robin Wright forcing a good character out of a mostly expository role. Despite the running time and the, I guess, modestly underwhelming denouement, the mood and atmosphere are a real pleasure to sink into, and while surprisingly lighter on the action business than the first one was, when we finally get around to a big climactic fight scene, it is a hell of a thing to behold. So I'm gonna say 3 stars, but let's put a pin in that just in case a year from now there's another director's cut that recontextualizes everything and this turns out to have been another classic. I mean, stranger things have happened.